Hi there. So today let's discuss about the recent China-Africa summit, which was attended by 50 countries from the African continent. 50 countries. This is mostly one of the most successful summit between Africa and other countries, because this year we had South Korea Africa summit. We saw heads of state go to South Korea. I think we also had Japan Africa Summit recently. We had Russia Africa Summit at the beginning of this year. And somewhere in between this year, we also had the United States Africa Summit. And, Joe Biden was there, confused as usual. But this one, the China Africa Summit, is one of the most attended. And because most of the time when it happens, it bears fruit. China is not a country that is used to lying and basically putting up a show and then doing nothing after the summit. So the recent one, China has promised to create 1 million jobs in Africa. They've also promised to finance close to 50 billion worth of projects in Africa. And the other thing is that you have to understand that China is now a 19 to 20 trillion economy. It's a very large economy. The Chinese population is about 20% of the world's population. That is a fifth. And their agricultural land is about 7% of the global agricultural lands. So they need a lot of things from outside China, despite them, of course, producing a lot of goods. If you look at the agriculture, which is the sector that China has promised a lot of these billions, China leads in production of so many things. They lead in production of oranges. They are the leader in oranges, the leader in watermelon, they are the leader in tomato production, the leaders in so many things, apples, and they are the second or the third largest wheat producers. They are the largest rice producer. But they still need to import a lot of things because, as I said, their population is 20% of the global population. So they produce a lot, but they also consume almost all of it. And that's how Africa comes in. So China has promised to finance a lot of African agricultural projects. Now, I know after this summit, a lot of African presidents will go back home and pretend that they were not in China. Others will get calls from their Western masters and get instruction not to engage China in these projects. That's what happens. So some of them just wasted time to go there. Others are there to get free money by requesting loans for these shiny projects like railway projects or hydropower projects or very shiny roads somewhere in Africa that goes to nowhere, so that they can kind of steal part of that money. You know what I'm talking about, right? So they like projects, then they steal the money, skim off some bit of money on top of from that project. That's what they want. They don't want to listen to what China is telling them, that we are the world's second largest economy. We are now approaching 20 trillion as an economy, and we want to help you to develop your agricultural capability. That is what China said, actually. Now, when you look at the data and you look at what China is saying, you realize that China is telling Africa to start producing some of the goods that they import. Now, one of the largest crop that China is importing, mostly from the United States and Brazil, is soybean, also known as soya. Now, if you go to most African countries, we still do plant soya, and it does very well, even more than the beans in Africa. As a matter of fact, I remember I once saw a farm with soya or soybeans, if you want to call them that way, and next to the same patch of farm there was beans, and the pests had invaded the bean section and left the soybean or the soyas alone, which means then that you can easily plant soya all over Africa, most places in Africa, but they still don't have that much of pests to disturb them in Africa. So it means we can do serious production. Now, the countries that are still producing soya or the soybean in large quantity are countries like Zambia, countries like Ethiopia. And in Zambia, if you look at how they're producing it, it's just they're using too much labor for very little production. While China can easily help these countries mechanize the process of production of soya or soybean. They can also do large-scale farm. China can give them loans, or they can partner with Chinese companies that want to come to these countries to start plantation level or plantation sized kind of soybean plantations. Because most African countries are still beholden to the cash crop they inherited from the colonial masters in 1960s. If you look at where the British were, those countries are still producing tea and coffee, which were the crops that the British were exporting from those countries. If you look at where the Portuguese were, you find that they have sugarcane and tobacco, because that's what the Portuguese were exporting out of Africa. Even today, the same countries like Mozambique, same countries like Angola are still basically producing sugarcane and tobacco, which is very sad. We should be producing things that are needed in most of the parts of the world, because soybean is used in China to produce cooking oil. They are producing soy milk, soybean milk or soy milk. They are producing animal feed. Most of the animals in China are zero grazed. They are grown in farms that have structures. The cows, the goats, and the chicken are inside buildings. You will not see them outside. And they feed on food produced from soybean. That's why the market for soybean today is about 126 billion every year, because China is importing a lot of it, and most of it is coming from the United States, and now recently from Brazil. Now, why am I saying that Africa can produce a lot of soybean and sell it to China? Because soybean from the US is part of the economic tariff or trade tariff that China is basically imposing on the United States after the US imposed trade tariff on Chinese cars, electric cars, and Chinese manufactured goods. So when the US basically places those trade barriers on Chinese products, in retaliation, China is placing trade barriers on agricultural produce from the US, which in this case we are talking about soybean. And that is what is happening. So if they press restriction on soybeans or the soybean from the US, but they need to find an alternative place to get it, and that should be Africa. We should go to China, get these 50 billion and start farming the soybean in Africa. In Zambia, we should now do large-scale soybean production. In Uganda, instead of the president of Uganda looking for loans to build large roads, because that's what he does, so that he can skim off some of that money, or construct pipelines to export oil, he should also be looking for money to grow soybean in Uganda. Congo was there, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They are looking for money to buy weapons to defend themselves against a tiny country called Rwanda. That shouldn't be an agenda, shouldn't be top of their priority. If Congo was serious, they can easily sort their security without a lot of money to do that, because they are a country of 120 million people. If they were serious and not corrupt, they can easily raise an army and stop this, whatever insecurity they are talking about. But they just want to distract everyone. They want to take money to go and buy guns and steal most of that money, of course, instead of going to China, getting the money to come and make Congo an agricultural producing country, because Congo exports nothing agriculturally. There's no single agricultural product that comes out of Congo. Nothing. despite the size of Congo, you know how big Congo is, despite almost every part of Congo being rich, having this rich soil. As a matter of fact, Congo has the same climate similar to Brazil because they are almost on the same latitude. And Congo produces zero agricultural export, while Brazil is exporting soybean to China in billions. So we should be talking about this. And when I looked at what the Chinese were saying, so they promised that this 50 billion can be used to basically construct nuclear reactors. This means South Africa can actually access that to construct a nuclear reactor. Same goes with Egypt and other countries like Algeria that wants to have nuclear reactors. This money, China said, they can be used to upgrade the transmission lines on the national grids in Africa. This applies to countries like now Kenya and South Africa, which have an aging national grid that is causing a lot of blackouts. China said they can also invest in cleaner energies like solar farms, wind power and stuff like that, or construction of hydropower stations. But the key discussion was on whether Africa can get this loan to do agriculture. That's what China wants. China is no longer interested in building beautiful roads for Africa. China wants Africans to grow things and sell to China, which is what we should be talking about.